I think it's also particularly interesting to think about secondary education in the context of a conference with the theme of school choice. And let me make a few remarks to begin in trying to set some of the scene, and at least in the way I see it. And I'll try and be a little bit provocative for our speakers and the questions as well. Firstly, the reason I think choice is particularly interesting and important at the secondary level is because of the students themselves. Students in secondary education, adolescents, boys and girls, are increasingly becoming more autonomous, more independent, more thoughtful, more future-oriented. And as part of this process of maturation, they need to make more and more choices. And of course, a really important outcome of secondary education is our individual children and young people, are they making good choices? And how does secondary schooling help them make good choices for themselves, for their families, for their communities, and for the country? So choice is a really important issue. But if I might be a little bit provocative for a moment, I wonder whether choice really exists at the secondary level. And I think it's quite a different set of issues than primary. And let me just illustrate why. Firstly, in theory, there should be a lot of choice at the secondary level in India because only 40% of children are in government schools, roughly 30% are in private aided schools, and the remaining 30% in private unaided schools. So in theory, this represents quite a bit of choice in the system. But I wondered, if you were taken to a school blindfolded and asked to sit through a lesson, would you know what type of school that you were attending? Would you be able to tell the difference by experiencing, as young people do, the education at a school, at a secondary school? Would you know what type of school you're attending? Is there choice in this respect? Secondly, of course, secondary schools, there are far fewer of them. So what choice do students really have at the secondary level, particularly if you happen to live in a non-urban or a rural area? Third, we know that actually the outcomes of secondary education, what children actually learn, is certainly in international terms quite poor. The recent results from OECD's Programme for International Student Achievement are pretty sobering reading in this respect. And I hope we can discuss that today. And lastly, there's a question of curriculum choice at the secondary level. We have a speaker here who I'm sure will talk something about vocational education. But again, what kind of choice does vocational education represent? Does it open up new opportunities for young people, or does it channel them and narrow their future destinations? So all of these reasons, it seems to me, makes the thinking and talking and understanding the nature of choice at the secondary level particularly important and particularly different from choice at the primary level, and indeed choice at higher education, I would say, as well. And therefore I'm very pleased that we have a session specifically devoted to this.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Toby, and thanks and congrats for CCS for organizing this. I think it's been a very interesting and dynamic day, I would say, right from the beginning. I decided not to use a PowerPoint because there are a number of studies that we have just completed. I'll refer to them, and if I had kind of got into the data, I think while we would like to always talk of evidence, I'm going to get to the main points, and in 15 minutes, I think I'm going to try and capture that rather than get into specifics and back each statement I'm going to make. One of the important statistics, I don't know how much it has really been absorbed yet because it's news which is just about 2 or 3 days old, is results from the PISA assessment, which in 2009-2010 were conducted in about 74 countries or regions. And for the first time, India participated in this, not India as a whole, but the 2 states of Himachal and Tamil Nadu. And India has performed extremely poorly, which is not something which would be a great surprise for people working in the sector, but probably the extent of the performance has been a shock to most people, because we have placed 73 out of 74 countries, with only Kyrgyzstan performing below India. I hope the only positive of this is going to be that there is going to be renewed interest. There's going to be pressure on all of us, I would say, to do something about this and to create change in the system. It is worth noting that these are states that are expected to be or believed to be among the better performing states. These are children at the grade 9 and 10 level, so the weaker children have already dropped out. And if these children are performing at the 73 or the 74th position, it tells you how bad the problem is. And with that, I want to link. I'm not seeing either Geeta or Karthik around, but I want to link with something we discussed in the morning, which is that are we saying that some type of school can achieve the 73rd position at 40% of the cost of the others? And as people from education, that is not very satisfying. It may be satisfying to an economist, where you say that if you're doing something, I do it at a more cost-effective manner. But really, the question to us is that, is what we are achieving worth it? I mean, are the outcome levels that we are achieving something that we think that we are proud of, or say that this is a system that is working for people? And that's where I think some of these debates, and I'll just refer to three of them. One has been this, low-cost private schools versus government schools, and one versus the other. The other has been the whole notion of for-profits versus non-profits in a slightly different way in education. And there is a stand often that for-profit should not even be there in the education space. And the third, I would say, is a debate about, say, for example, English medium versus the regional medium. And sometimes the risk of these debates is that they kind of take us from the more fundamental issue of the fact that we are dealing with extremely poor quality, and we need to crack this problem. It is a problem that is solvable, and these debates and divisions should not take us away from identifying and focusing on this fundamental problem of making a difference here, where children are learning much better. One more study which we have just completed, and some of you may have seen again in the Mint and the Hindu newspapers, is also worth mentioning, because when we talk about outcomes and learning, people often say that as a criticism that, this is focusing only on the academic aspect. This is only focusing on the cognitive aspects. So you're ignoring a lot of other things. And this is a study that has been completed in partnership with Wipro. And this looked at outcomes, but not restricting only to academic outcomes. It looked at things like sensitivity of children, their how much are they, what is their behavior with children from other castes, gender sensitivity, as well as things like the environment, the school climate, and so on. This was done in India's top schools, not in government schools or low-cost private schools. And again, so there are two takeaways. One, that outcomes can be measured in these areas also. Of course, the needs we need to improve the methods and make them more sophisticated. But we can talk of outcomes, and these outcomes can be comprehensive. We can say that academic outcomes, but this is outcomes in terms of students' attitude, values, and have more and more effective techniques to measure these. And the second learning, of course, was that even on these parameters, there are some causes of concern, where children are we're probably not very happy with what we are seeing in terms of results there. But I just wanted to give this background, maybe one more point, and then come to deeper aspects of the point itself. And that is that in Gujarat, we are now working with about 30 schools, which are mostly government, but a few trust schools in the rural and urban areas, and looking at a 5-year improvement program, which has an important component of outcomes and assessment. But the interesting part of this program is that a part of the entire cost of the program is actually linked to the actual learning improvement that will be achieved, saying that the fees are related to the actual improvements. If you don't achieve the learning outcomes, a portion of this is linked to that. So I think that the focus on saying that the efforts we are making, whether it is government schools or private schools, we need to be able to link them very dispassionately to independent third-party assessments, is something that we will need to do if we have to focus on the fundamental problem, which is improving the quality of what children are learning. And here so with this I want to move to the second aspect about outcomes and learning, because I think this is something which is generally neglected and, for example, has not been spoken of at all today. See, we generally assume that, for example, we generally assume that if in case teachers come to class and teachers teach, then children will learn. We assume that the gap is in terms of effort or in terms of intent or sincerity. We think that there is nothing much more to that process, that the process of learning itself is a reasonably simple and a straightforward one. Toby referred to rote learning. So one of the big issues is this, that what is the kind of learning we are talking about? Is it learning in terms of the child being able to do certain things mechanically from the textbook? And our work on the last 10 years, and we've kind of been able to go deeper and deeper into that, has been showing us that this whole area of learning is an extremely deep and a complex one in which work and research is limited not only in India but everywhere in the world. Understanding how, for example, if I take the case of India and you look at an issue like, say, reading levels or children's ability to do basic math. Now, data shows us very clearly that the results are extremely poor. Children are not able to read. You find that this is not very different. For example, if I take a test like the PISA and I apply it, say, only to low-cost private schools, you will find, and here I would echo Karthik's point, that a lot of our so-called effectiveness in education comes because of impact like the household, the family background, and the kind of support that is being given at the home level. If in case you purely look at the school parameters, you find that the effectiveness of what children are actually able to learn becomes even more questionable than the data actually shows. And for us to really be able to fix this problem, we need to get into something that we call the science of learning, which is that equipping the teacher in a much more fundamental way in terms of helping children acquire, whether it is basic skills like reading and writing, or when you go to higher levels, if in case you want children to actually understand what they're doing at the secondary level, the whole science of how children learn these concepts, what are the misconceptions they face, what are the difficulties they face. Without doing this particular thing, we cannot really do either effective teacher education or eventually student learning. So this is an area which is just beginning to get importance even internationally. And just one quick analogy to explain this point is that of, say, the field of management studies. Now, the field of management studies was kind of invented or created in India in the 1960s and probably internationally in the beginning of the 20th century, when Harvard and others started a management program. So what was management? It was a new discipline that was created from a number of other disciplines, the social sciences, applied to a particular problem in a particular situation. In a similar way, we need a science which actually looks at areas like the specific subjects, psychology, computer science, artificial intelligence, cognitive sciences, and comes up with methods that teachers can actually be trained on. And unless we are able to do this, so if you go to a country which has traditionally been strong in education, you may not see these issues. You find that, okay, the system continues and does well. But how many countries have been able to dramatically make a difference in the learning that they're able to do? And one of our hypotheses is that even the so-called well-performing countries, the countries which are supposed to be at the top of the league, can actually do much better if in case we were actually looking at how children learn and actually training teachers and equipping them to handle this. I mean, again, a very simple analogy is that as a teacher, before I walk into the class, do I have data on what are the difficulties children face, what is it they need to know, and what do actual data saying that when you teach this is the kind of difficulties children will face and this is what you need to do to address it. And unless we focus on this, the good news in India is that even a state is large enough as a unit to do focused research with outcomes saying that this is the focus of the thing. We want, whether it's for reading in the lower classes or math learning in secondary. So this is something which is possible and necessary if we have to create an impact in terms of actual learning. My last 2 points relate to technology and what I would call personalized learning, which is a specific theme when you talk about secondary education. So let me talk a bit about personalized, and the two are completely linked. I cannot do personalized learning without technology. And this is particularly true in the case of secondary education. So there is a core to education that every child must get. The child must be able to read, do basic maths. I would add things like creativity and entrepreneurial skills in the core that must be covered in primary education or basic education. But beyond that, the beauty of education is that it has to allow the child to proceed and go into depth into the areas that they want. And this is what you can call it, the term personalized learning may seem like a fancy term, it's only for the rich and so on. But that is not true. If in case we want children to really learn, we have to allow, in some form, allowing streams, where children pick up the stream they want to do is one example, a crude example of personalized learning. But personalized learning really means that I'm questioning the paradigm of, why must all the children in a class, just because they're of a given age, be studying exactly the same thing because it was part of one curriculum that was defined as a point of time. And if in case we really define learning as every child, learning well, we come to the inescapable conclusion that you cannot do this if in case your unit of instruction is always going to be, a group, which is either a classroom or an entire age group of children studying the same thing at the same time. So personalized learning is something which is not an elitist concept. It is something which is possible. Again, to take a simple example, and I'm going to take it from primary education, skills like reading and math, the work that we are doing is showing us that children who've not been able to read for 3 or 4 years, if you're able to give them personalized instruction, which is through technology, but which allows them to get inputs at exactly the level that they want, this can make a much more visible impact in their ability to pick up reading or basic math skills than if in case they were always in a group where the teacher is trying to address their level but not necessarily aware of where each child particularly is. And that brings me to the last point, which is that of technology. I can argue for technology from 2 or 3 different perspectives. One, of course, is the scale perspective, that the number of teachers that you would need if in case you had to effectively deliver education in a country like India is not going to be possible unless you effectively use technology. So that's one part of the thing. But the second part relates to what I just spoke about, learning with understanding and personalized learning. When we actually look at how children learn, and we've done some interesting experiments with areas in secondary education with topics in maths, more in maths and a bit in science and language, which says that if you really go to the way in which different children are learning and the difficulties they face, and if children have to learn properly, if these difficulties need to be individually tackled, you can prove that it is impossible for a class teacher, even if they are dealing with 40 or 35 children, to do this without knowing in detail the levels of where the individual children are and the difficulties that they face. So for something like this, you actually need technology if in case you have to effectively address these issues. So with that, I'm just going to summarize and close by saying that there is a lot of data which shows that the level of what we are achieving in our education system, and you can go whether you're talking at the primary or the secondary level, is extremely poor. And the issue is not about what it has cost us to get to that level of education. The issue is that are we fundamentally satisfied with the level that we are reaching? Incidentally, one thing I just wanted to mention here is that one of our hypotheses for a number of years has been that part of the problem lies in the way we assess at the end of the system. And hence one critical thing that we need to do is to completely change the system of board examination and have it based on understanding. And one state, again, Gujarat, we're engaging in this project and actually creating a new system where over a period of 5 years, the system here will focus on being on par with the best school leaving exams in the world. And secondly, focusing on outcomes and learning. And if every child has to learn with understanding, it has to be based a lot on personalized learning. And in order to do this, especially in the secondary stage, technology has to be technology, but carefully developed based on research and education has to be a key part of this. Thanks.
As we move to the next session, which very aptly has been praised right after the right to education session, I think, or did you have the PPP session? So it's linked to both. And the issue which was provided to me, which was addressing issues of access, renewed objectives. I thought the renewed objectives component is very critical because we need to look at access now with renewed objectives and with new lenses. The reductionist approach generally that we have towards access, that access means providing school spaces, which is really bricks and mortar and infrastructure, is what we now need to get over with. Access is very holistic, very, very all-encompassing, and the connotation needs to become larger, and the discourse has to become much wider. So when we look at access, the components which impact access and what constitute access needs to be looked at. Because access to what? Access to quality secondary education. And as we are grappling, the World Bank, we work with the Government of India on Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, which we've been doing over the last almost 10 years now, less than 10 years. We will very soon be working with the government on the Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan, which is the program for universalization of secondary education. The issue of access is difficult, and we are looking at it in a much more holistic way rather than just providing school spaces. So I'll take you through, I mean, what we feel is are certain critical aspects. And since Sridhar has talked about PISA, that's also something I'll briefly share with you, because the development partners that the World Bank and the DFID were supporting it with the Government of India, so the results are very interesting. So the broad scenario is what I'll present, then the critical issues, India participation in PISA, and the public and private provision of secondary education, which I think is the crux of this whole issue of access and access to quality education. Now, the evolution of secondary education, I'm presenting data from the document which we had made around 2004, 5, 6. But some of the data I'll present about from our results framework that we are now prepared with the government. So the steep rise in the requirement and the gross and net enrollment ratio is something which is quite heartening. But if you look at the GER at the secondary level, that's combined at lower and senior, which means secondary and senior secondary levels, it was 40% in 2004 and 5, and the secondary is 52% and senior secondary 28%. Hopefully when the next round happens, it might have gone up a little bit, but for our purposes, we are building on this. Regional comparisons, if you look at the GDP and the per capita, this thing, in India, it's again 720, the GER is 52. Bangladesh is 470, the GER is 71. Now in China, where it's 1,740, the GER secondary is 91%. So to a large extent, the issue of provision, the issue of financing of education becomes quite important. Now the trends in secondary education, if you look at in absolute terms, the total secondary enrollment in 2004-5 is 31.1 million students, 65% in the lower secondary. This 24.3 million, we revisited this data in about 2008-9, it comes to about 25.5 million. And 35% in the upper secondary, which is 12.7 million. So there's a huge increase in just about 5 years, which reflects the great demand for secondary education. Access to good quality education, which impacts again our need for better and improved school spaces. And the increased supply, which is being provided from the private sector. Now, as we move to the secondary level, the whole issue of public-private partnerships, I would like to include the aided schools within this segment, which was actually a PPP of its kind. Which somehow became a more public good. It becomes very critical at the secondary level. If you look at the rates of return to education, you see that secondary is way ahead, and it's very critical that we invest and we give a lot of attention to the secondary level, especially in India. The demand for secondary education is going up. These are the projected demands very, very significantly. And by about 1920, there would be need for about less than 60 million students, access to 60 million students, less than 60 million students, which impels us to look at other ways of providing education, not just through school spaces, innovative ways of providing education to the child where he or she is actually located. Now, these projections suggest the increase, as I told you, in the absolute demand. And so it looks, again, we need to look afresh as to how do we look at the public and private sectors as per the response which is required by this increasingly growing sector. Importance also is the equity and political issue. You see, there was somebody was talking about it in the previous during lunchtime, and I think what's very critical is that the whole issue of PPP is looked at as something which doesn't seem to be very transparent, very neat, and it's very important that we need to debate how do we do public-private partnerships which are acceptable, which are politically acceptable. More than anything, it might be transparent, it's politically acceptable. And it's very critical for us to look at the whole issue of public-private partnerships with the equity lens. The debate on PPP is because it seems to be focusing on the sections which are elite, which are urban. But the point is, you have a whole group of children who live in rural areas who have not been provided access to good quality education that a private sector provides, with English language teaching and ICT, etc. So is it not an issue of addressing the needs of the disadvantaged sections if you provide them public-private partnership, where the government becomes the buyer of the services? So this issue needs to be looked at, debated, that it's an issue of equity, and we need to provide transparent ways of looking at it, appropriate regulations in a system which can reward the private sector accordingly as the state may deem fit. Now, the private unaided schools provide, as Toby was mentioning, about 30% of the secondary education enrollment nationwide. And it has gone up from 15% into 1993 and 94, and it's significantly going up. If you look at some of the states like Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, they are hugely sort of going away from, I mean, they have private aided schools, and there's very little government schools. So the space of the government is reducing in this space, and there may be appropriate opportunities to look at the aided schools as modes of doing public-private partnership. Like I recall in Maharashtra, there was an initiative by the government that the Zilla Parishad schools, which are 474 odd, they wanted to take over these aided schools and offer them on public-private partnership, do the school upgradation and run it for the government. So the dramatic growth is increasing, and there is a willingness and the capacity of the government to pay. So this whole voucher scheme concept and the school choice concept ought to be, I think the dialogue needs to move from the primary to go towards the secondary segment. And there is an increasing inequality at the secondary subsector, as the poorer households cannot afford to pay the fees which a school choice is looking at. But that's where it's important for the government to step in and bring in its resources, buy the services from the private sector, provided to the children who can't afford it. So the scene seems to be very ripe for public-private partnerships, but again, innovative ways of looking at PPPs. I won't go into this. The social divide is undeniable, so we will not go into. But international comparisons, if you look in Latin America, the public subsidization of private secondary school is lower than that of India. More than 70% of private school funding comes from student fees in Latin America. That is, they cater to upper and upper middle class households. East Asia has a smaller private secondary system, and more than 50% of its funding comes from private sources, suggesting a greater use of public-private partnerships. Now, you know, why I'm mentioning this is because the results and the achievement levels which PISA throws out also has implications from these kind of factors on PISA, which looks at actually application-oriented knowledge in children in three subject areas. But it also looks at a host of other issues like community participation, the kind of school, the spend of the government on education. Now, this is a slide which is slightly disconcerting. If you look at the physical access to secondary education, and you'll see that how Arunachal Pradesh is I think the worst hit. Jharkhand is pretty bad, Bihar, Orissa, and as compared to that, Kerala, Punjab seem to be in a better off situation. So the problem of physical access to secondary schools, good secondary schools, is again what a lot of states are grappling with, and the RMSA, the Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan, the first, I understand that the government has decided that the first few years, 60% of the total allocations is going to go into the area of civil works and creating physical assets, which at times makes one worried that, you know, ideally quality should come together. Now, the most important thing, the quality deficit. The PISA first round in India, which was done in 2000, and this is the 2009 round. Reading, it showed 89.6% of students in HP and 83.2% in Tamil Nadu scored below level 2 in the entire PISA. So India is the second from the bottom, and as compared to 18% in the OECD as a whole. Mathematics, it was 88.6% and 85.3% in Tamil Nadu, as against 22%, which is the average of OECD. Science was 89.1 in Himachal and 84.9 in Tamil Nadu. Now the average scores in the top 5% in India come much closer to the OECD average, which is a disconcerting fact. Reading, I mean, these are the scores, and I think Indian Express has carried a huge editorial on it today, so you can just refer to that. But there is little difference between public and private schools. This is what is a very important information which is coming out from the PISA analysis. Now, how have countries looked at and built on it? Now, Brazil, what it did was, it moved from the lowest to by 30 points in 2009 because it increased the spending on GDP and increased teacher salaries, and achievement was given a lot of importance. Achievement that Sridhar was mentioning, the kind of achievement that needs to be looked at. Turkey moved up by 20 points because it made primary education compulsory and increased attendance and feeding into the secondary level, and private sector investment became very important there. If you look at Shanghai, China, it was the top performing. And one of the reasons why it allowed a lot of non-governmental interventions to happen, which includes private sector work and community mobilization, and the compulsory education right thing happened. Now, where do we go from here? Addressing the demand side and the critical aspect of quality. There is a need to increase awareness, and I said that, you know, the need to demystify the public-private partnership debate, to look at it as not something which is a monster, but which can be looked at very transparently, and a trust can be developed between the private and the public sector. Financial incentives for the target groups, conditional cash transfers, which is again a variation of PPP, and in-kind incentives. Now, the demand side, curriculum has to be engaging, classroom transaction processes have to be engaging, and the evaluation system has to be such, assessments have to be student friendly. These are some critical factors, and the focus on the equity aspect, the disadvantaged sections, girls, SC, ST is important. I'll just move to the next level. Planning is what we felt was needed special attention, and even as we are working with the government, we are giving a lot of attention on the annual work plan and budgets, which need to look at access, not only in creating infrastructure in school spaces, but looking at a variety of interventions, like, you know, the supply of teachers. Now, for providing access to quality education, you need at least 500,000 new secondary teachers over the next 10 years. Where are they going to come from? Now, there are ways of doing things. Maybe you can move up teachers from the primary to the secondary. But what is going to happen to the area of institutional reform in teachers, teacher institutions? If you look at the IASCs and the CTEs, which are supposed to be catering to the secondary level, there's huge amount of, I mean, they are practically dysfunctional. So these are areas which are going to help us look at access, make us move in the area of access to good quality education. And the other important thing is teaching learning materials. But more than that, I would look at technology. And you see, the National Institute of Open Schooling works very integrally in the area of secondary education. Somehow we need to tap into these innovations which are coming up, which have somehow not got the fillip that it needed, and make them move in a manner that you provide access to the child to quality education, even if he or she is not able to go. You don't bring school to within the 5-kilometer or 10-kilometer limit which has been specified by the RMSA. So what are the innovations that we are looking at? How can we make that happen is what we are debating today. And perhaps one of the key things is encouraging public-private partnerships. Public-private partnerships not only in building school spaces, provision of quality services, which is the provision of services, but also looking at teacher education institutions as providers of quality education at the secondary level. So PPP for teacher education is what we feel is another area which can improve access to quality elementary secondary education. So what's the way forward really? Increase in the demand and supply side interventions, access not only to schools but to quality teaching learning through institutional reform. That's an important component. And using innovations through ICT. Now, if you look at the ICT program, it's just provision of infrastructure and hardware. How do we go towards providing what Sridhar was saying? Good content so that the child can become an autonomous learner. And improve the teacher education system. Institutional reform is very critical. So what is the need? state-specific secondary education systems need to be strengthened, and clarify the center-state financing, which leads to again the deficit being met by the private sector. And we need to work both on the demand and supply side initiatives and pilot new PPP models. I think a few have been explained in the morning, and we look forward to them becoming very successful. Thank you.
Since morning, I think we have been talking about education, education, education. I think along with education, vocation is of equal importance, which the data, if you will just go through, it will be, somewhat proving it. And I think all of us would agree that, after education, what? Everybody goes to work, gets into his own business. But whatever you do commercially, you need to have skills and practical skills, working knowledge. So,
do you have a mobile phone in your pocket?
No, it's not. My mobile is there.
Maybe you should carry it.
Thank you. So, every individual needs a skill to succeed. And I believe education and vocation both are of equal importance. You can't do away with either of them. This is what India represents. We had the car race now, and you can see the man. You have got metros. You can see the situation in Mumbai, the jhuggies in Mumbai. So India is a land of diversity. We all know about it in all respects. Either you talk of geography, either you talk of economy, either you talk of culture. It stands. We all today know that about our demographic dividend. We will have an average age population of 24 years. This talks about distribution of educational attainments at the age of 25. So we see it, 51% goes through the, 31% undergoes the primary education in India. Whereas in secondary we are left with only 11%. And we can see the numbers in different countries of the world. The national policy for education, though it came up in 1982, and in 1988, there was, the concept for vocation in education, in secondary education started. And till date, they could, with this program, they have been able to reach to 10 lakh people by running this program in 10,000 schools of India. So these figures give us a overall picture of, as on 2008, you have the population of 48.6 million. 97.1 was the projected population within the age group of 14 to 17. Children in secondary education was 28.9. In higher secondary, it comes down to 16.6. We were talking of shortage of schools. We have got 1,23,000 higher schools in India, and higher secondary around 60,000, just coming to half, because the number of takers are half. We heard about the GER from the World Bank presentation Sabnam was mentioning. The skilled population who are formally skilled is only 2% out of the total workforce in India. Although we say 10% people are skilled, but the remaining 8% are, they have learned through their ustads and during the process of work. This talks about the dropout case. What are the challenges? 90% of students drop out at different stage before class 12. So out of 200 million people enrolling in class 1, you have got 20 million passing out in class 12. So at one end, we are talking about improving the education system. At the other end, we can see the turnaround. 67% of the existing workforce is either illiterate or literate up to primary level. So challenges are again diversified. Where should the government focus? Should they focus on education or vocation? So this talks about some existing framework for vocation. You have got ITIs, you have got polytechnics, and you have got some private training organizations which are funded by, again, various central government schemes. So this comes under Ministry of Labor. We have got Polytechnic, which comes under Ministry of Human Resource and Development. So there are barriers, and the synchronization is missing, and that creates, again, we can see today, once we go forward, we can see how it impacts the overall delivery mechanism. So we have got 12.8 people joining the workforce every year, 12.8 million people. India has got 10,000 ITIs. China has got 5 lakh. Population-wise, we are not so different. The current framework delivers poor quality of education. This is again a survey report which has come out of FICCI. The areas of concerns like poor infrastructure, inadequate access to education, we all heard about these points since morning. The vocational education system, whatever we have in India, is not so encouraging because it doesn't lead, it always leads to a dead end. What do you do if you become a plumber? What do you do if you become an electrician? Can you get a doctorate degree? Can you be accepted into the society? Is there an acceptance of a plumber or an electrician or a driver? So if you talk about vocation, if you talk about the skills, you lose this status in the society. Indian society do not acknowledge them. This talks about the, again, delivery, that if 100 engineer passes out in India, you have got only 25 good enough to work on day one. And only 10 people out of the general education system good enough to employ. And you have got, numbers for other countries as well. We talked about career path. There is no career path in vocation. Now, I am coming from NSDC. It's a Government of India initiative associated to Ministry of Finance. When we started in October 2009, we came out of the National Skill Policy of Government of India. So this was a survey which we did, sector-wise. We did a survey of a skill gap into 20 sectors. And we found that 240 million will be adding, or there will be a gap of 240 million in next 10 years. And there are existing 300 million people in the working group. This talks about various levels of qualification people have in the workforce. So we are, from year-wise, we can see from 2007 to 2025. We feel that with all these efforts, the number of illiterates will reduce, and we will have more graduates coming in out of our education system. We heard today the training capacity, the vocational capacity in India is 4.3 million. Total training capacity in India and skill upgradation is only 4.3 million. As per the National Skill Policy, we have to skill 500 million people by 2022. How do we reach there? Should we start going into bricks and mortars, building educational training institutions? It will take us 10 years to reach that. By the time the current age group of 25 will be 35, and they will all move into LWE areas. The challenge is really very, very daunting. So how do we do it? So we'll come how NSDC has thought of it and trying to implement it. Yeah. We have brought in these players for vocational education and many more to come. We are working on a PPP model. We heard about working out a PPP model. We are working into the vocational space purely on PPP model, on a sustainable, scalable, employable model. Those are the three fundas of ours. And the private players who have joined us, they say that they have got an IRR of 25. The challenges here is student mobilization, inadequate enabling environment, like you don't have a curriculum, you don't have vocational courses defined. There is an awareness level gap even at the employers, and they do not know how to recognize that. We heard this. I heard a question that teachers, how do we rate them? So I think the Sector Skill Council for Education will be doing that, defining the levels of teachers and how they should be rated, how they should be paid. All those things will be a function of the Sector Skill Council. So this, it's an unregulated space. I will skip this. These are the interventions required, capacity is required, standard and curriculum is required, community-based interventions are required. Existing facilities to be leveraged, I think everybody today is talking about it. These are different business models which we are working on. We see that in the space of vocation, not limited to secondary, but entire vocation space, it's a market of 1 lakh crore. There is huge opportunity. Limited players are gone into it. You might be one of them after hearing to me. This is MHRD, the effort which MHRD is taking now. You have got a population of 7.27 crores and only 5.5 are into the upper primary. So this gives an overall picture, and what the effort is, I will just take you through. Yeah. We talked about 10,000 schools, 10 lakh students. This is National Vocation Educational Qualification Framework. For level 9 and 10, for classes 9 and 10, they have started a pilot program in Haryana and West Bengal, wherein the vocation classes will start at 9th and 10th. And they have got two parallel streams going. One, you have got vocation and education, and you can do, it's fungible. From vocation, you can go to education, and from education, you can go to vocation. It's a 4-year pilot program which is being run in 2 states. And if that is successful, they will be implemented in other states as well. So this talks about it starts from class 9 and it goes up to the doctorate level. So how the certification would be done, who would be the certifying body. So this is being worked out by Ministry of Human Resource Development. This is about NSDC. We do a funding. 49% is Government of India, 51% are private associations like FICCI, CII, ASSOCHAM, NASSCOM. They all have bought a stake and they are on our board of directors. So we give loan at the rate of 6% to people to set up training institutions across India in any sector, including education. This is what we have done till date. 42 proposals we have approved, 34 are into training and 8 are sector skill councils. I just spoke about a sector skill council for education, so there are other sector skill councils also. Thank you.
Thank you.